let's go to the first of the VlE series that I have. Now, I'm not going to do a formal introduction to this because I did an introduction over with Quatre Battles and Espagna, where that's the most modern rule set. This is the old AWE rule set. It's not the first versions of these games, but it's the first ones I was vaguely aware of and went out to pick up because, hey, I got this thing about AWE, right? And when I read through the rules to it, I said, hey, this looks like kind of a light version of the NBS style orders if you play with the optional rules. Let's give it a shot. Now, what we learned with the other game that I played of, or the other battles I played of the series, is it's a little bit more maneuver oriented, and it actually works kind of nicely, although maybe flavor wise I prefer what I see in the NBS series. Still, it is definitely a means of delivering these tactical battles with an order system. These older rules are almost entirely the same. There are a few differences. For example, artillery is handled slightly differently in terms of it's more complex to figure out where they get penalized. And I think what I'm going to do, because the values are approximately the same, the fire values, it doesn't look like those have changed significantly, is I think I'm going to just go with the modern version of the rules. In fact, one of the few optional rules that's not included in this older version is making the skirmishers work the way they did in the new version, where they break down into little skirmisher units. There is an option on skirmishers, I believe, and they call them skirmishers instead of voltigeurs. They changed its flavor a little bit. And this explains the firing at skirmishers modifier that's over here. That, I think, is an artifact, but the cloud of skirmishers still provides something like that. I don't think I want to play with this version of the rules for the skirmishers. So I've got the, well, I know I don't want to. So I'm going with the cloud here. There may be a few other things that are a little different. One of them that's different is these games, being AWE games, come with a pile of random events that you're going to get assigned a few of them at the beginning of the scenario, and I guess you get to draw some. I'll have to look up the rules on that. Each player draws a number of chits at the start of the game and more during the game. These are given the scenario, and honestly, I didn't see them in here. Ah, here we go. So 3 for the French, 1 for the Russians, and 1 at the start of each game, beginning with the second turn, I guess, the start of each turn. So we're going to have a set of those. I'm a little questioning of whether or not I really like these, but there's some special events in this battle that I feel like I really need to use them. But some of them seem to apply with other role, with, you know, so for example, there's a fatigue chit, but it kind of just slows down the enemy units. It's not exactly, or an enemy unit or something. It's not exactly the same as the fatigue rules, and I'm going to play with those fatigue rules, I believe. Basically, I'm going to play with the same set of rules that I was playing with before. The terrain effects chart is a little different. It includes some new terrain brush that's not in the old chart. I don't have it available. And that covers this here. There is somewhere in these And yes, they look like photocopies. This is what comes with the game. And from what I learned with EU, this is kind of what Azure Wish provided you with in terms of play aids. Is what looks like photocopies, really. So this terrain up here is actually not defined, but I think it's difficult terrain. Oh, wait, here we got some. Yeah, it's difficult terrain. Okay. So it is defined. They provided these little things you can cut out. I'm not going to do that, but it's basically a way of writing your orders for each of the commanders. And it also gives all the stats on the commanders. That information is available on the counters, so I'm going to do the written orders the way I did them. There's another significant difference in this game, but one that, in terms of components, but one that doesn't come... Oh, look at the map, man. Ouch. Yeah, I complained about the other one. So this one actually has these little setup letters, though. But some of them aren't written on the map, and some of them are really hard to see. So, for example, this one here, I can't see this. But luckily, there is a little chart that gives them all here. This one, for example, doesn't exist on the map. There's a couple that don't exist. There's just some problems with that. There are a number of counters that I had to correct. They don't have the right number on that. We ran into like one of those over in the newer version. So, you know, the attempt at quality control has improved. I suspect, you know, maybe Legion gave them a little help with this. Anything else here? Yeah, there was one major thing that's different. So each of the counters has a chit for when it takes a morale loss, so that you can have the correct morale for the unit on the board. You still have to look up, if you're doing a melee attack, to figure out just how many steps you have involved in the attack. Although I guess you could abstract that and say, hey, it's whatever the chit says it is, and you know, once you downgrade, you downgrade. This is kind of a weird thing, because it is going to create something where I have to look and find particular chits for that. Let's look at the specifics for this battle, though, which are spelled out in here. This is Friedland. I've done Friedland before over here, Eagles of Empire or whatever. I wasn't terribly impressed with that system, although I went and bought another game in it. Because I don't know what. I wanted to give it another shot or something. The rules in the Friedland one were very bad. Allow is supposed to be a little better. And I don't have anything tactical on Allow yet. Anyway, the perception in this one is a little different. In that game, the Russians had some sort of desire to hold the French back for a little while before withdrawing. Here there doesn't seem to be any reason to try to blunt the attack of the French. The Russians actually get a lot of points just for leaving the map. So this is going to be almost an absolute withdrawal scenario. Now all these slopes are against the French. This is kind of a gully, which is not quite as bad as a stream, but pretty close. Okay. Let's see what else we have, or what special rules we have here. Lines of communication, it's the roads going off the map. The Russians have 2 over here. The French have 2 over there. They got little arrows on them. The river. The river's uncrossable, except at bridges and the ford. The ford itself is painful to cross. There's some steep slopes there and everything, and so what happens is basically it takes you a turn to cross, and you're disordered after you cross. Doesn't look like a good way to attack, and it looks like a tough way to retreat. The Russians are pinned against the river here, and that's why Napoleon attacks. We got some roads on the bridges. The bridges can actually be destroyed. A unit on either side can spend its whole turn adjacent to the bridge, enemy turn, and then it's able to destroy it on the next turn. And that bridge is just gone then. And artillery can fire at the bridge. The bridge have 2 steps. The first step loss, once they take 2 step losses, the bridge is gone. You mark them, you know, with the counters or whatever. There's a pontoon unit over here. I actually could put it wherever the hell I want as long as it's not next to the river. And it can move up next to the river and start to build a bridge, and that takes a full turn to do. That bridge, though, is then also destroyable. The Russian Guard is under their commander-in-chief, Bennigsen. Russian ammunition. So the Russians are low on ammo here because they've been firing for a while, actually. And they're 2 big infantry units, which is Markov and Doktorov, I think. Yeah. Can only fire half their artillery in a turn, or if they choose to fire more than half, they take a -3 die roll penalty for every artillery fire. Now, a -3 die roll penalty is pretty damn severe, so I don't think that's going to be chosen very often. Okay, the Russians have wing nuts. They have 2 wing generals. Now, wing generals in this system are not a helpful thing. They are an excess... Well, they could conceivably be helpful because they can actually take an order from the commander-in-chief and issue it to their entire wing. So you could give an order to withdraw the entire wing with just one order. So that's helpful. On the negative side, though, orders have to go to the wing nut, then they have to make a roll and pass it on. So there's a potential for an extra layer of delay there with the wing leaders. Oudinot and Murat. Okay. Oudinot has a divisional command. He's somewhere over here under Linné. And Linné's over here with Nappy. And essentially, they say he's just allowed to give his command bonus to units in his command. I would rather give him a stronger role than that. That he will operate with Linné, but you can detach him to go do something on his own. And that he kind of extends Linné's command radius for his own units. Again, I'm just making up some roles here. I know some people complain about that. Okay. Whatever. These are not competitive games, folks. Army morale 160 for the French. But if the French Guard unit is disorganized, they immediately lose 10 points of morale. So you want to keep the French Guard from operating. And that's under Bessier, who is back here. The Russian army has 130 steps, and their morale drops by 10 as soon as a French unit enters Friedland. Which is one reason you might want to hold, the French off for a while at least. But initial orders, the Russians can have any initial orders to begin with except withdrawal or retreat. Well, I'm not attacking, so they're going to have essentially defend in place orders until Bennigsen gives them something better to do, which will probably happen. He'll start issuing orders right away. The French are going to be allowed to write whatever orders they like. I haven't written them yet. The game is based on victory points, and you have to just get an excess over your opponent. But what are victory points? Well, they're different for different players. The French get a point for each Russian step that they eliminate, and 10 if they kill leaders, and 20 if it's Bennigsen. The Russians only get a half point for eliminating French steps, except for the guard and the first corps. The reason being that overall, the French have another army kicking around in the area. This is the last Russian army, and this defeat leads to Tilsit. They get 1 point, though, for each Russian that they're able to slip off the map in good order, except for the Somov division down here. And then they get 10 points for each French leader eliminated. If they kill Napoleon, they win the war. You know? There's a set of options for the game that the different players could purchase. And then a bunch of errata on the map, etc. Support for many of the different optional rules, strategic deployment, etc. And this one feels a lot more comfortable than the last game of the Spanish battles that I played, which felt like it just didn't merge with the optional rules terribly well. At least the command rules. The other rules worked fine. I'm going to try to play with fatigue again. I really liked what that did in the couple of battles that I used it, and pretty much all the others. Oh, Cav in this game. So Cav in the old version is also a little different. There's only light and heavy Cav, and I'm going to follow the rules again for the new version, which is based on the movement allowance of the Cav to determine whether or not it's light, medium, or heavy. And again, we see some of the artifacts of that in the newest edition of the rules, where they've got the distinction between light and heavy Cav, and they don't talk about line Cav at certain times. Well, we can see where it comes from. The new edition was not completely brought up to date to support its rules. So even the core rules are not, completely in good state. This one was definitely a headache to sort and set up, especially with the counter errata that I had to write on some of the counters, etc. But I didn't write on the map. That's going a little too far, especially since I have what I need on here. All right. Well, we'll try starting this tomorrow. I got to write some orders and stuff. It's going to be complicated, and it's already late. Okay, so the orders are written. I'm going to have to figure out how to set these up in a way that they're not going to cause me problems, because I put little chits on them for the fatigue. I use the order sheet as my fatigue sheet at the same time. Perhaps not the most effective means of handling things, but I think it'll work. This is a small map. Okay. It'll be a problem if I run out of space on the order sheet, though. I'll have to figure out new things. The situation more or less dictates the orders. I mean, if you play with the strategic or whatever, the optional setup rules that allow you to do things by zones and kind of set up your forces as you wish, you end up with something probably a little bit different. But we're in a position where, the Russians are trying to fall back but aren't allowed to have withdrawal orders at the beginning. So what I want to do is I want to get, I got to get, I'm afraid I forgot to give the Guard Cav any orders. I'm not sure I want to give them any. Because moving them to some place kind of commits them to it. And I have a Cav advantage over here, so I kind of want to keep them flexible. I am going to move the Guard infantry towards the center. Not to commit it, but to keep it in a reserve in a slightly more accessible location. And likewise, this guy is going to go over and take up the right flank on Doktorov. It's only a 10-turn scenario, I think. Yeah. Late start, 4 p.m. Summertime. For the French, Fairly simple orders: Ney, clearing the forest, and then working to clear this area here if there's any need for that. Who's up here? Victor is to clear this and then swing around to take Friedland. He can take it both through this road and also from this direction as applicable. I attached Latour, Mars, that's not him, that's a battle. I don't know who the hell it is. Ah, jeez. Latour Marburg. Over, I can't remember, my French generals, to support Victor's right flank. There's a little bit of cav here. I want to make sure I get it out of the way. Victor's okay. He's got some cav too, so, as does Ney. So this, I've got overwhelming cav power there. So the Russians probably can't use their cav to any effective purpose there. The problem is I've got this slope that I'm going up, which, oh, maybe that's a ridge. Oh, geez. All right, somewhere. Yeah, we don't have any slope, so that's got to be a ridge. That does not allow charges, I believe. Huh. We don't have a difference of the charge to normal movement here. In Forest Russian Town, movement cost is doubled. I'm going to have to look in the charge rules specific to this rule set to see if they give any prohibition, because that would have been an acceptable, if that's just a slope, that's an acceptable charge, but if it's something more intense, as the word ridge suggests, that probably wouldn't be an allowable charge under the newer rules. Anyway, what do we got over here? Nansudi is going to be supporting. Oh, did I give Udno any orders? I've got to get Udno some orders too. Oh no, I don't. He's part of Lene, or Lan. He's going to be supporting Lan's force. Udno I'm not giving any specific orders to at this point. This is Mortier over here. So Lan's orders are to clear to try to get to this bridge. Mortier's to clear and try to get to the ford. I think he's supposed to support Lan as necessary if he's having kind of a roadblock or something, try to clear that. We have Grouchy over here who's supposed to support the left flank over there. And then the guard here is going to move up to the juncture between these two, and again, holding in reserve. The French guard, there's a significant reason not to commit it, because if any French guard units break, we get a penalty to our overall morale. That's not as severe as maybe it is in some designs that I've seen, in terms of, you know, committing the guard is a pretty big facet. So even like breaking isn't the only thing that a failure by the guard would cause a problem. I mean, the guard really didn't break ever, and they're not going to. Look at these units, 11 morale. He's just kick-ass. This is a much better French army. I don't have many units, maybe any, in line formation anymore. They have very heavy fire values compared to the Russians. The Russians have fire values that are comparable, it looks, I mean this is artillery here, but they're comparable to what we saw in our other scenarios, whereas the French units Yeah, these are 3s, but I've got some units in here with higher fire values. Maybe they're the guards, I don't know, that are particularly effective, and I'm looking forward to seeing how they hold out. What about my events? Okay, the Russians found a cool event to have in this scenario, which is they know about another ford. And basically I can trigger that off to create another ford as I need it. It can't be close to a bridge. The French have a few tactics, which just really is kind of lousy. It's a +1 die roll bonus on a fire or melee. I mean, it's nothing bad. It's just, you know, it's 1 die roll, man. Compare that to this ford one. The VlE Emperor is a great one. It allows me to pick any event, but that means that I've got to be aware of all the events, and I haven't figured that out yet. And then this last one is a light charge. This one's kind of cool, but again, it's only one action, one activity. Any one enemy except guard gets a penalty to their morale check by 1 when trying to form a square. Not really sure that I'd try charging the guard. I ain't gonna succeed anyway. Or I can give a light cav a +2 movement allowance bonus when charging, which the latter one sounds the most interesting, because although, you know, if I'm really worried about trying to take a flank out or something, the other one is. But it's going to allow me to make a charge where I wouldn't normally have the range for it. So that's kind of appealing. And I guess we start. It's better than having it happen after I start playing. Shit. The sheets of paper in this are a lot lighter than in the other version, and a little tiny gust of wind, boom, my setup's destroyed. Probably another 20 minutes at least to try to fix that. Okay, I haven't done the defensive fire yet, but we've got columns running into the skirmishers down there, which should be pretty good. If you look at the terrain effects chart, these forests and such not put you in general order where you have very little firepower, and there's a defensive benefit. So essentially fire is useless. Only melee works in the forests. Those skirmishers might have an effect, the ones that were plowed into, but essentially there's no effect to those guys. They're just going to get hit hard. And the only thing is, they do have some advantages in that the attacker has a penalty going into there. But we'll see. We'll see if it's enough, because I'm getting numbers against them. They're not completely useless, it's just that they're not fire capable. Which isn't to say they're not firing, it's just melee includes close range fire in this system. Pulled some artillery up. Well, the first thing that happened was a couple failed charges up here. We did break 1 Russian unit, but otherwise we have not undone that fairly powerful cav detachment that the Russians have there. I also had a charge here that I blew back after creating a square. This is the markers for square in this game. What's missing in this game are the post-charge markers. Now I could have used reverse of squares or something, you know, the wrong country's square markers or who knows what, but I dug out some post-charges. I'll figure out what I want to do. Maybe I'll just I could also use these Russian leaders. I don't know what the hell they're for. A bunch of blank leaders. I'm focusing in the center because this cav worried me. I failed to charge it out of the way, and coming up against it, I'm going to get countercharged. Yeah, maybe you might say, well, that should take out 1 unit. No, not the way this game works. I can countercharge each unit as it comes up, and I'm just, I've got some massed artillery fire I'm hoping can budge that thing. Otherwise, if I can move this flank, I'm going to collapse the side, and the Russian army really can't stay exactly where it is, which is a pretty neat position with that cav there if I can't dislodge the cav. I also have some artillery here to help. But otherwise, I'm concentrating on the center. There's a lot of artillery here, some of which has gotten some op fire. I'm not getting too close to it, not up on the slope like that. I can't move it very easily. Although actually this gun I think is alone for some reason, which is not something I intended to do, but the French didn't test that. They'd have to run a gauntlet of fire to get up there, so that's kind of troubling. And we'll see how well this works. One thing I want to say is with dedicated cav corps, I'm much happier because those units can charge or move, and they're just picking up 1 fatigue each. What I think I'm going to do is I'm going to say a unit can melee or move, but if it does both, it gets 2 fatigue. Melee and move each create 1. That way I can do this, which is move these guys up a little bit. This is a cav reserve that I've got in place. And I charged with this unit. If I'm following the rules explicitly as they say, I would be paying a fatigue point for the unit that charged, and then I'd have to pay an additional fatigue for moving other units. I really don't like that. It makes the cav pick up fatigue way too quickly, in my opinion. And it doesn't make sense because this entire command charged. They got movement out of it, they got an attack, and they just paid 1 fatigue out of that whole thing. Why can't these guys kind of reposition on it? So I'm going to try to fudge around with the rules and try to feel for a level that makes more sense to me. And, you know, I don't know if I'd ever want to play this opposed simply because I feel like the rules aren't solid enough to hold up, at least with the options, to hold up to what the kind of flexibility we have. I have a 10 on this guy because cav that charge or cav that voluntarily disorder are able to rally immediately, something I've been forgetting. And on turn 1, I'm not sure what number to put on them to remind me of that. And with both Ney, Victor, and I guess Linné as well. I didn't think I was doing Linné. I thought I was doing Victor there, but oops. Actually engaging in melee. Where's Mortier? Oh, he's back here. Okay. We've broken the Russian center and pretty much taken the forested area out. The Russians are in bad shape here right off the bat. I had to charge in hard. Otherwise, they could just withdraw and get their victory points. We've got significant losses on both sides. Actually, we'll give you a count at the end of the round. But now it goes on to the Russian side, and I'm not quite sure what to do. I don't have orders that allow me to just withdraw. So, and unlike in the gamers type stuff, you can't just fall back on your own in this. You got to try to follow your defensive orders. There's nothing like an emergency corps retreat or anything like that that allows you to pull out of a situation, which is one of the pities of not having a richer set of rules, although some of those actions might be perceived as kind of cheap, you know, to get you out of a situation like this. But honestly, these forces have no desire to stick around where they are. Now, all the disordered units can run, so it's not that bad. I don't have to leave them out there. At the end of the first turn, we see most of the Russian force sort of falling back as well as it can We got some formed units here, a little bit here, but otherwise this is mainly a disordered mess. I sent orders from Bennigsen. They reached here. I get to check to see if they're going to be implemented, but they won't go into effect next turn no matter what. And they're wing orders to withdraw entirely. Those orders then have to be dispatched out further. Now, Markov here can receive them immediately. Actually, I don't think that the wing commander has an extra turn delay. So those orders have to be dispatched out to the individual, I guess they're corps, but it's kind of questionable because those Jaegers over there really, I don't think they're actually a corps. So it's going to take some time to get that withdrawal underway. Meanwhile, you've got the guard kind of here, but it's behind a bunch of disordered stuff. And we have this little corps here who, Samov, whatever, which has to head up this way. All the units moved, and you can see I'm using more modern disorder counters for the fatigue markers. There just aren't enough counters to handle everything in this game. And I found that we got away with them in the other game, but there simply aren't enough to handle the fatigue rules in this one. Casualties mounting up. Now these Russian units here, these are infantry that actually were reduced rather than destroyed. I'm just keeping them there. I like to watch the dead pile grow. And no melees by the Russians. By the way, they did do some counter charges here. Again, not terribly effective. You can see, though, they threw one of the French cav back. Basically, the French failed to get the counter charges. These were actual charges. The French failed to get the counter charges into play. I think I said counter charge, but I meant because, hey, we were charged, so we counter-charged, right? Trying to see if there's anything else terribly exciting going on. We'll see how the French, how easily they have cracking this open. I didn't get very far today, unfortunately. The wind, and then, I don't know, with work and everything else. And I drag my feet when I'm starting something. This was something of a headache. And then I went for a walk, too. One thing to remember with the command system is the game works fine without written orders. And the game also works fine even without command radii. So all that you're doing with the command system is putting a further limitation on the players. One that you believe is right. And if you start feeling that the command system is too burdensome, which I sometimes do with a game, the answer is often step it back a little bit, make it a little less restrictive. This doesn't pertain to anything in particular. It's just me babbling at random. But if you start looking at this and saying, yeah, I feel like I'm not allowed to do what I really wanted to do when I wrote those orders, interpret them a little differently then, On the other hand, with this particular scenario, I feel that it is fairly important, and without a command, without the written orders, it kind of doesn't work, to keep the Russians from just kind of streaming back. My observation is there seems to be a fair amount of an attempt to model individual unit capabilities more in this scenario. So for example, this unit has a 4 firepower. These guys, your average French, have 3. I don't know if that's it's part of the first corps, but presumably it's a particularly good firing unit, because I don't think the frontages change between the units. So that is kind of a pain in the butt, because there are surprises there when you're looking, if you're counting up fires. Honestly, my eyes aren't that great, I can see that difference, but you know, it does mean something else you have to check. If you know all the French infantry have a 3 firing value, you just say screw it. If you know they all have a 6 movement allowance in column, well, now some of them have 7s. What's up with that? Well, they're lights or whatever, but still. On the other hand, I purely feel like, or felt like, I was disobeying orders by not engaging very hard, or fairly hard, with Mortier here. Now, here's the problem though. I'm marching right up against guns on a hill, and I start going there. 2 of them hit me here as I'm moving into this hex, and boom, I'm back. Units coming in here, the infantry covering the artillery so that the artillery could set up right in front of the guns. Now, the Russians still get their first shot, but they also get a shot as I'm coming in. And yeah, this is not precisely how I'd want things. The reason I gave those orders is because I wanted, worried the Russians are just going to fall back. But man, this is a brutal situation. But anyway, I'm advancing. I advanced on the 2 corners. I'm not going right up against the guns in the center. That's just too much for me. I did not like. I tried it once, twice, and I didn't like the results. Actually, these guys got scattered from distant fire, which is, you know, staying at any distance is dangerous because those things can plunk me as soon as, you know, within a few hexes range. The nice thing about the reduced units is not just the step number right on there so you know how weak the unit is, but you also have an indication of sort of a minis type representation of how many forces are there. So this unit was reduced from this unit, and I've got kind of a, hey, this is a big hefty unit. Now, yeah, I probably don't want that, you know, I don't want to count on that for a lot of combat. So there's a nice graphical representation. I do like the replacement counters for it. It's a luxury, you know, you have everything on here, but I find myself not really looking at these charts when I was doing my movement with the Spanish battles, and I had some pretty chewed up units that I was counting on to hold a line, and you know, if I saw this I would say, yeah, I don't think that's gonna do. And to the French side of the turn, you can see Ney's cleared out this part of the woods. He failed on this unit though, didn't budge it. And let's see. We have just checking something to see. Okay. Nappy's over here to give Mortier orders. I think Mortier is going to call off his attack. He's done 2 rounds of it. It looks ineffectual, so I'm going to want Napoleon to give him some kind of orders to support Lannes or Lan in a somewhat better fashion. Yeah, my pronunciation's right. I'm so used to. I forgot to draw these chits. I did it partway through the turn. You know, I don't know how much I'm going to actually use them. They add a little bit of flavor to the game, and I don't terribly dislike them, but I like the core system, and things like this are hard for me to remember. It's you know, it's like playing a CDG or whatever, where you have these cards you have to remember when you're gonna affect them. Most of them are just, oh, I get some little bonus and I want to take it, but you know, my chances of remembering. The one exception is that I really do like the Ford. The ones that are very scenario specific, I'm probably going to use. Then there are ones that I can't use at all, because I'm not playing with certain rules. Now you could just leave them out of the deck or the cup, or you could take them as, well, they're not useful. So there's ones that let you, you know, deal with the decoy counters or whatever, which I'm using as skirmishers actually. Made some ground against these disordered units, obviously. I did not launch melee attacks over here, actually anywhere but with Ney, just because I don't want to shoot my my fatigue levels up. And that's another reason for Mortier not to attack.
you know, it would be nice to have that unit in reserve for when Lan's force gets tired, because launching it against this hill is just not doing me any good. It's just giving me casualties. So now the Russian orders phase is in play, and I'm running into problems. This order just arrived, and I've got Benningsen's not in place to give orders to Doktorov yet. Well, is it Doktorov who's in charge? I can't tell because I hid those. I got the feeling Doktorov's the corps leader. No, it's some... It's very hard for me to read these. It's this guy. And I can't read that even with the camera. Okay. Anyway. So here's where the problem is. The counter has one value on it, which is supposedly the initiative for these leaders. On the back it has one number. Now an initiative of 5 under these rules means he can pretty much do what he wants by simply rolling for initiative. On a 1 through 5 he succeeds in getting it. He gets a morale penalty throughout his organization for switching the orders, etc. But that's not terribly bad. But then over here on this sheet, he's got an initiative of 3. Worse, he also has an obedience of 3. Now, over with the Spanish ones, they tended to have 2 very different values. I'm sorry, that's Doktorov, not who I'm looking for. But the issue still stands. This is, I think, Bagration. Again, I can't read the counter because my eyes are so lousy. I think it's Bagration. I can't tell. I don't remember what I'm facing here. Yeah. I don't know where he is. It makes sense that he'd be fairly decent, actually. Or should that be Bagration? Well, I'm not sure he has a sheet. And this is really troublesome in a lot of ways, is that, you know, not everything. Oh, it could be on the sheet that I pulled out for this, maybe. I doubt it. But the Russian leaders are. Anyway, I find it hard to believe someone has, you know, the same value for both. The initiative's pasted on there as if they hadn't intended, and this is the old rule book, as if they hadn't intended for there to be an obedience value. However, well, maybe these order check. An order is revealed. Okay, so when an order arrives, yeah, so there's an obedience value on the sheet, but there's no initiative value on the sheet. And it's troubling if they are the same. Let's take a look at what Doktorov is on here, because maybe, yeah, so Doktorov matches his value there. So he may, I mean, there is still a penalty, but see, these values are essentially the same. Of course, these are the French marshals. Ney has a worse obedience than initiative, which is kind of interesting. If this were NBS, where there's no real penalty for taking an initiative roll except the possibility of a loose cannon, you wouldn't bother writing Ney any orders. However, there is always a one-turn, one morale problem when the leader takes his own effect. I just wish that I had a Bagration. Well, here's my feeling. Bagration's a pretty kick-ass dude. And I'm going to give him a 5 on that. So he has a fair chance of just accepting the order right off. And I'll give him a 5 for both initiative and for the other. I really wish both numbers were on the backs of the counters, though, because then I wouldn't have to flip through this and wouldn't have to worry about leaders who aren't in the game. Okay, so Bagratian's taking the orders, and now he's going to filter them through, because we haven't seen a wing before. So Markov immediately goes under orders. Now, he doesn't immediately implement them, but he immediately gets these orders. However, I have to forward them over to Rassi here, or Rai, or whatever his name is, which is going to take another turn for him to achieve his withdrawal orders. And now I'll write those out. I didn't bother writing them out because it was, you know, I'm not doing it on a per corps basis. When I send them to Bagration, I'm telling him to withdraw generally across the river, and I know what the order is going to be. If I was playing this opposed, I guess I would have to write out those orders, or more likely I would play with just the order chits, because I'm not sure the written orders are as well supported in this, as well enough supported to work well with an opposed game. You really either have to just kind of fudge it, which is what I'm doing, and it's okay because I have a certain view of what the orders mean, and you kind of have to do that with the CWB, NBS stuff anyway, or I can, try to develop my own very specific rules as to what the orders mean. And here, the kind of problem is if you allow written orders, you start to allow things like, oh yeah, attack, but you know, you can take your time on the attack lightly, stuff like that. That all really starts to create huge gray areas. I've talked about this all in the gamers stuff. And, you know, those same instances are in play here as far as I'm concerned. Which is to say that I'm not requiring you to meet the chit requirements for an attack order or withdrawal order. I'm requiring you to kind of meet the spirit of them, though. One thing that's bothered me with previous games and with this one is the immunity to fire if you're in the woods or something. I'm reverting that to any fire going into a space that results in a total of less than 1. And I couldn't find any support for this in the rules. I'm just making this up. Ends up being resolved on the 1 fire table. This allows you to shoot people, you know, if you're in square or in column, who are in a village or some other heavily defended thing, and have some effect on them. There may be some questions about it. For example, you know, if you're at normal range in the woods, you wouldn't be able to shoot each other. So I can understand why the design would say that there is no effect on that fire. But on the other hand, it seems to me, especially in a skirmisher type situation, that there are skirmishers out there firing back. Now, it's come too late for the Russians to really do any damage to the French, but it is really bothering me, and I feel like you shouldn't be able to move up near that close to an enemy without taking some sort of very mild risk that there might be an ambush or something. Now, that's baked into some of these, the ambush chits and stuff like that, but I'm just kind of putting it as a very low level of fire that's going to be assumed to be present, with the assumption that the units actually do get closer together to where they can see, where lead units can see each other, and some casualties could be accumulated, enough to count for straggler losses or whatever that represents. And the French attack is actually being pretty heavily blunted. These artillery that are sitting here drove back some of 1st Corps. We got pretty much this whole line here. The attack on this side failed. Of course, over here, who is that? Mortier's line is pretty much in collapse there. And we've got Russian Imperial Guard moving into fill where the French had gotten kind of a breakthrough in the center. And that is a significant stiffening of that line. Look at the morale values on those guys, 11s. I'm not going to break through there very easily. So they're holding the gap in there. What looked like it was going to be a sort of quick French rolling of the lines is not going to be an easy fight. And meanwhile, the orders are taking effect. No rallies or anything at this point, simply because we're not deep enough in this area. So we're going on 5 p.m. here. I think I'm going to load this one up because it captures that first turn. The next turn is going to be longer. I'm going to probably step back, as I usually do in these videos, and not just literally, and you know, give more of an overview view of things. I've zoomed in a little bit on this one simply because there are some differences between this and the more modern representation. I'm using the more modern rules, but there are a few places where I'm not sure that that's necessarily the right thing to do, and also where there's maybe a slight mismatch, and certainly the actual physical components are a little different. The numberings on the counters, etc., show a little bit of difference there. And this particular battle also, you know, has some specifics to it that are a little different. For example, having the wings. We haven't seen wings actually in play before.